Volume 11 of the collected works of C.G. Jung, Psychology and Religion, West and East. A psychological approach to the dogma of the Trinity, which was published in 1942 and 1948. You could judge my gross fucking toenails. Friends, I don't care. We are on chapter 2, page 129. I have dwelt at some length on the views of the Babylonians and Egyptians, on the Platonist philosophy, in order to give the reader some conception of the Trinitarian and Unitarian ideas that were in existence many centuries before the birth of Christianity. Whether these ideas were handed down to posterity as a result of migration and tradition, or whether they arose spontaneously in each case, is a question of little importance. The important thing is that they occurred because, once having sprung forth from the unconscious of the human race, and not just in Asia Minor, they could re-arise anywhere at any time. It is, for instance, more than doubtful whether the Church Fathers who devised a homoousios formula were even remotely acquainted with the ancient Egyptian theology of kingship. Nevertheless, they neither paused in the labors nor rested until they had finally reconstructed the ancient Egyptian archetype. Much the same sort of thing happened when in AD 431 at the Council of Ephesus, whose streets had once rung with hymns of praise to many-breasted Diana and Virgin Mary, was declared the birthgiver of the god. As we know, that Epiphanes was even a sect, the Collyridians, who worshipped Mary after the manner of antique goddess. Her cult had its chief centers in Arabia, Thrace, and Upper Scythia, and most enthusiastic devotees being women. The provocations moved Epiphanes to rebuke that the whole female sex is slippery and prone to error, with a mind that is very petty and narrow. It is clear from this chastening sermon that there were priestesses who on certain feast day decorated a wagon or four-cornered seat and covered it with linen, on which they placed offerings of baked meats, the name of Mary. Afterwards, partaking of the sacrificial meal, this plainly amounted to a Eucharistic feast in honor of Mary, at which wheaten bread was eaten. The orthodox standpoint of the time is aptly expressed in the words of Epiphanius: "Let Mary be held in honor, and let the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost be adored. But let no one adore Mary." Thus the archetype reasserted itself, since, as I have tried to show, archetypal ideas are part of the indestructible foundations of the human mind. However long they are forgotten and buried, always they return, sometimes in the strangest guise, with a personal twist to them, or intellectually distorted, as in the case of the Arian heresy, but continually reproducing themselves in new forms, representing the timeless truths that are innate in man's nature. Even though Plato's influence on the thinkers of the next few centuries can hardly be overestimated, this philosophical formulated triad cannot be held responsible for the origins of the Christian dogma of the Trinity. For we are concerned here not with the philosophical, that is, conscious assumptions, but with unconscious archetypical forms. The Platonic formula for the triad contradicts the Christian Trinity in one essential point. The triad is built in opposition, whereas the Trinity contains no opposition of any kind, but is, on the contrary, a complete harmony in itself. The three persons are characterized in such a manner and that they cannot possibly be derived from Platonic premises. While the terms Father, Son, and Holy Ghost do not proceed in any sense from the number 3, at most the Platonic formula supplies the intellectual scaffolding. For contents that come from quite other sources, the Trinity may be conceived platonically as to its form, but for its content we have to rely on psychic factors, or irrational data, that cannot be logically determined beforehand. In other words, we have to distinguish between the logical idea of the Trinity and its psychological reality. The latter brings us back to the very much more ancient Egyptian ideas, and hence to the archetype, which provides the authentic and eternal justification for the existence of any Trinitarian idea at all. The psychological datum consists of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. If we posit Father then Son, logically follows, but Holy Ghost does not follow logically from either Father or Son. So we must be dealing here with a special factor that rests on a different presupposition. According to the old doctrine, the Holy Ghost is vera persona, que e filio et parte nisa est, a real person who is sent by the Son and the Father. The processo e parte filici, procession from the Father and the Son, as a spiration and not a begetting, that this somewhat peculiar idea corresponds to the separation which still existed in the Middle Ages, or corpus and spearmen, the latter being understood as something more than mere breath. What is really denoted was the enema, which, as its name shows, is a breath being. Animos equals wind, although an activity of the body, it was thought of as an independent substance, or hypostasis, existing along the body. The underlying idea is that the body lives and that life is something superadded and autonomous, conceived as a soul, unattached to the body. Applying this idea to the Trinity formula, we would have to say Father, Son, and life. The life proceeding from both, or lived by both, the Holy Ghost as life, is a concept that cannot be derived logically from the identity of Father and Son, but is rather a psychological idea, a datum, based on an irrational premortal image. This premortal image is the archetype, and we find it expressed more clearly in the Egyptian theology of kingship. There, as we have seen, the archetype takes the form of God, the Father, ch2, the begetter, and the Son, the Ka, is the life spirit, the animating principle of men and gods, and therefore can be legitimately interpreted as a soul or spiritual double. He is the life of the dead man, and thus corresponds on one hand to the living man's soul, and on the other to his spirit or genius. We have seen that ch2 is a hypnotization of procreative power, in the same way that Holy Ghost is hypostatized procreative power and life force. Hence, in the Christian Trinity, we are confronted with a distinctly archaic idea whose extraordinary value lies precisely in the fact that it is a supreme hypostatic representation of an abstract thought, two-dimensional triad. The form is still concretistic, and that the archetype is represented by the relationship Father and Son. Were it nothing but that, it would only be dyad, the third element. However, the connecting link between Father and Son is spirit, and not a human figure. The masculine father-son relationship is thus lifted out of natural order, which includes mothers and daughters, and translated to a sphere from which the feminine element is excluded in ancient Egypt as in Christianity. The Theotokos stands outside the Trinity. One has to think of Jesus' brisk rejection of his mother at the marriage in Cana. Women that have I to do with thee, John 2-4, and also earlier when she sought the 12-year-old child in the temple. How is it that ye sought me Wist ye not that I must be about my Father's business? Luke 2:49. We shall probably not be wrong in assuming that the special sphere to which the father-son relationship is removed is the sphere of primitive mysteries and masculine initiations. Among certain tribes, women are forbidden to look at the mysteries on pain of death. Through the initiation, the young men are systematically alienated from their mothers and are reborn as spirits. The celibacy of the priesthood is a continuation of this archetypical idea. The intellectual operation that lies concealed in the higher father-son relationship consists in the extrapolation of an invisible figure, a spirit. That is the very essence of masculine life. The life of the body or of a man is hoisted as something different from the man himself. This led to the idea of Ka, or immortal soul, able to detach itself from the body and not dependent on it for its existence. In this respect, primitives have extraordinarily well-developed ideas about a plurality of souls. Some are mortal, others are only loosely attached to the body and can wander off and get lost in the night, or they lose their way and get caught in a dream. There are even souls that belong to a person without being lodged in his body, like the bush soul, which dwells outside in the forest in the body of an animal. The juxtaposition of a person and his life has its psychological basis in the fact that a mind which is not very well differentiated cannot think abstractly and is incapable of putting things into categories. It can only take the qualities it perceives and place them side by side. Man and his life or his sickness visualized as a sort of demon, or his health or prestige, mana, etc. This is obviously the case with the Egyptian Ka, father-son, life, or procreative power, together with rigorous exclusion of the Theotokos, constitute an patriarchal formula that was in the air long before the advent of Christianity. The father is, by definition, the prime cause, the creator, the actuator, Rerum, who, on a level of culture, where reflection is still unknown, can only be one. The other follows from the one by splitting off from it. This split need not occur so long as there is no criticism of the Octor Rerum, so long, that is to say, as our culture refrains from all reflection about the one and does not start criticizing the Creator's handiwork as a feeling of oneness far removed from critical judgment and moral conflict, leaves the Father's authority unimpaired. I had occasion to observe the original oneness of the Father world when I was with the tribe of Negroes on Mount Elgon. You could definitely tell he's old. These people professed to believe that the Creator had made everything good and beautiful. But what about the bad animals that kill your cattle, I asked, they replied. The lion is good and beautiful, and your horrible diseases, you lie in the beautiful, and you lie in the sun, and it is beautiful. I was impressed by their optimism, but at 6 o'clock in the evening, philosophy came to a sudden stop, as I was soon to discover after sunset another world took over, the dark world of that Ayak, who is everything evil. Dangerous and terrifying. The optimistic philosophy ends, and a philosophy of fear, ghosts, and magical spells for averting the evil one begins. Then at sunrise, the optimism starts off again, without any trace of inner contradiction. This was back in, 1942 this was published, so he could have been hanging out with these people in 1930s. Who knows. Here, man, world, and God from a whole unity unclouded by criticism. It is a world of the Father and of the man in his childhood state, despite the fact that 12 hours out of every 24 hours, 24 are spent in the world of darkness. And an agonizing belief in this darkness, the doubt never arises as to whether God might not also be the other. The famous question about the origin of evil does not yet exist in patriarchal age. Only with the coming of Christianity did it persist itself as the principal problem of morality. The world of the Father typifies an age which is characterized by a pristine oneness with the whole of nature. no matter whether the oneness be beautiful or ugly or awe-inspiring. But once the question is asked, whence comes the evil? Why is the world so bad and imperfect? Why are there diseases and other horrors? Why must man suffer? Then reflection has already begun to judge the Father by his manifest works, and straightway one is conscious of a doubt which it is self, the symptom of a split to the original unity. One comes to the conclusion that creation is imperfect, nay, more, that the Creator has done his job properly, and that the goodness and almightiness of the Father cannot be the sole principle of the cosmos. Hence the one has to be supplemented by the other, with the result that the world of the Father is fundamentally altered and is superseded by the world of the Son. This was the time when the Greeks started criticizing the world, the time of Gnosis. It is the widest sense which ultimately gave birth to Christianity. The archetype, the Redeemer, God, and original man is age-old. We simply do not know how old the Son, the revealed God, who voluntarily or involuntarily offers himself for sacrifice as a man in order to create the world or redeem it from evil, can be traced back to the Parousia of Indian philosophy, and is also found in the Persian concepts of original man. Gaelmart, son of the god of light, falls victim to the darkness from which he must be set free in order to redeem the world. He is a prototype of the Gnostic Redeemer figures and the teachings concerning Christ, Redeemer of mankind. It is not hard to see that a critique which raised the question of the origin of evil and of suffering had in mind another world, a world filled with longing for redemption and for that state of perfection, which man was still one with the Father. Longly he looked back to the world of the Father, but it was lost forever because an irreversible increase in man's consciousness had taken place. In the meantime, and made an independent with the mutation, he broke away from the world of Father and entered upon the world of Son, with this divine drama of redemption and ritualistic retelling of those things which the God-man had accomplished during the earthly sojourn. The life of the God-man revealed things that could not possibly have been known at the time when the Father ruled as the one, for the Father as the original unity. It was not defined or definable object, nor could he strictly speaking either be called the Father or be one. He only became a Father by incarnating in the Son, and by so doing became defined and definable by becoming a Father and a man. He revealed to man the secret of his divinity. One of these revelations is the Holy Ghost as being who existed before the world was. He is external, but he appears empirically in the world only when Christ had left the earthly stage. He will be for the disciples what Christ was for them. He will invest them with power to do works greater perhaps than those of the Son. John 14:12. The Holy Ghost is a figure who deputizes for Christ and who corresponds to what Christ receives from the Father. From the Father comes the Son, and common to both the living activity of the Holy Ghost, who according to Christian doctrine is breathed forth spirated by both, as he is the third term common to Father, Son. He is in fact the third element that rounds out the three and restores the one. The point is that the unfolding of the one reaches its climax in the Holy Ghost, after polarizing itself as Father and Son. This descent into human body is sufficient in itself to make it become another, to set it in opposition to itself. Thenceforward, there are two, the one and the other, which results in a criterion tension. This tension works itself out in the suffering and fate of Son, and finally the Christ admission of abandonment by God, Matthew 27:46. Although the Holy Ghost is a progenitor of the Son, Matthew 1:18, he is also the parcelet, a legacy from him. He continues a work of redemption in mankind at large by descending upon those who merit divine election. Consequently, the parcelet is, at least by implication, the crowning figure in the work of redemption on the one hand, and in God's revelation of himself on the other. It could, in fact, be said that the Holy Ghost represents the final, complete stage in the evolution of God and the divine drama, for the Trinity is undoubtedly a higher form of God concept than mere unity, since it corresponds to a level of reflection on which man has become more conscious. The Trinitarian conception of a life process within the deity, which I have outlined here, was, as we have seen, already in existence in pre-Christian times, and essential features being continuation and differentiation of the primitive rites of renewal and the cult legends associated with them. Just as the gods of these mysteries become extinct, so too do the mysteries themselves, only to take on new forms in the course of history. Large-scale extinction of the old gods was once more in progress at the beginning of our era, and the birth of a new god with new mysteries and new emotions was an occurrence that healed the wound in men's souls. It goes without saying that any conscious borrowing from the existing mystery traditions would have hampered the God's renewal and rebirth. It had to be an entirely unprejudiced revelation, which, quite unrelated to anything else, and if possible without preconceptions of any kind, would usher into the world new and a new cult legend. Only at a comparatively late date did people notice the striking parallels with the legend of Dionysus, which was then declared to be the work of the devil. This attitude on the part of the early Christians can easily be understood, for Christianity did indeed develop in the unconscious fashion, and furthermore, its seeming lack of antecedents proved to be the indispensable condition for its existence. As an effective force, nobody can doubt the manifold superiority of the Christian revelation over its pagan precursors, for which reason it is distinctly superfluous today to insist on the unheralded and unhistorical character of the Gospels, saying that they swarm with historical and psychological assumptions of very ancient origin.